Hey, welcome back, knife nerds and everyday care people. It's your boy, the Big Canucker, and we're just continuing on our journey through the folding knife. Okay, now I've gone through already a few things. We've had a couple of videos here, and so what we're going to continue on here, they're going to continue on with knife steel. Now, steel in itself is such a huge, over-encompassing subject, and you can get very, very deep down that rabbit hole. So in order to not get too bogged down with a lot of the technical aspects, we're going to just continue, we're just going to concern ourselves with knife steel, okay? Now, steel was created, I'm going to say, thousands of years ago, okay? And all basic steel is your basic material, which is iron, which is very, very malleable, and it's not as strong, and it deforms easily, and it won't take a good edge. So what they did a long time ago is they introduced an atom in there called carbon. And what the carbon ended up doing was it attached itself to the iron at a microscopic level, and it just increased the strength, the edge holding ability of iron. So they created what's called an alloy, and an alloy is just simply multiple things put together to create a new thing, which is steel. Okay, so in your knife steel, you're going to come up with a couple of different knife steels. Okay, now so you're going to have yourself a carbon steel or a high carbon steel. You're going to have yourself stainless steel. You're going to have yourself tool steel, which is very, very similar to the high carbon steel or the carbon steel. And then you're going to have yourself Woots or Damascus steel, or even people call it pattern welded steel, okay? And then you're going to have yourself San Mai. And San Mai is basically a mild steel with a harder steel in the center of two different steels. So just all that does is it gives you the ability to have a really, really good edge holding ability with an outside that is more flexible. Because if you had the entire blade that was that hard steel of the center, it would be very brittle and easily broken, whereas a San Mai blade gives you the best of both worlds. Okay, so now just to quickly go over here, high carbon steel is just simply steel that has had lots of alloys, mainly carbon in there. And the one thing about carbon steel is it is not rust or corrosion resistant. You're going to end up, if you don't take care of your carbon steel knives, they're going to rust, they're going to develop a patina, they're going to oxidize and things like that. Okay, so now that we've got stainless steels, okay, now there is no such thing as a truly stainless steel. There are things that are stain resistant steels. There are steels that will take a longer time to rust or oxidize, but eventually they will get there and you can stain them. Now, I'm not saying that there's not ever going to be something like that, or that there's a lot of the stainless steels. I mean, it would take, years and years and years for it to rust away, but eventually rust will get at it. Now with the stainless steels, there's a couple of different ways they can do that by adding elements in there. Chromium is one of them. The other thing they can do is in our steel structure, without getting too technical in it, we've got oxygen in there, okay? So instead of taking, oxygen is a huge part of rusting. Now, rusting is basically oxidization. It's just taking the oxygen in the atmosphere, and the element is changing that element at a microscopic or level. So what they do is they take the oxygen out of that steel and they introduce an inert gas, which is nitrogen. So that's where you get a steel like LC200N, is a steel that is highly, highly rust and corrosion resistant because there is no oxygen inside that blade. It's hydrogen. Now hopefully, or sorry, not hydrogen, nitrogen. Now hopefully that, kind of helps you with that. So now we've got tool steel, which is very, very similar to a carbon steel, but it has got a high carbon steel in it. And there's all sorts of other elements that are added to steel to make it a tool steel. Generally, the tool steels are very, very wear resistant. They are very, very strong. They've got great resistance to chopping things, and they resist deforming, and they're very, very good with dealing with heat too as well. Most of your tool steels, and if not, I do believe all your tool steels will also rust and oxidize. I don't think there is a stainless tool steel. If I'm wrong anywhere, please leave it in the comments. And then of course we've got Welded and Damascus Steel. And just to go over that, now there is no such thing right now as newly made true Damascus or Welded steel, because they've lost the ability to replicate Welded steel how they did it 2,000 years ago. They can come pretty close, but they don't know how they did it 100%. Now, Welded steel actually came from southern India, and basically what that was is they took they took the iron ore, they introduced carbon sheets at a very, very fine level, and they created a steel that has patterns in it. Okay, so this is just basically two different types of steel folded over in a pattern to create a pattern. So how they did it back then, I'm not 100% sure. So then they took the Welded steel to Damascus, Syria. So either it was built there or sold out of there, which is how they've got now Damascus steel. So, and this is what they've got here is these are copies of or patterns for not necessarily true Damascus steel, but what they've called right now is called pattern welded steel. And that is simply taking two different types of steel or more than two different types of steel, layering them in a specific way, heating them red hot, and either melting them together or pounding them together so they weld themselves together. And it's called, so pattern welding. When you weld it together through force and your hammer, it will create a different pattern depending upon how you've laid out the two types of steel and what they are. If they're just completely flat steel and it's folded over and over and over, you'll get something like this, which is kind of a ladder steel, okay? Now, if it's something where you've got a little small pellets of different types of steel, and that's put inside a box heated red hot with some powder, and it's bashed together, it'll create a different pattern steel. But ultimately, it is a steel that is pattern welded steel, which is how you get the Damascus looking steel. Now, normally, Damascus steel, and even the ancient Damascus steel, doesn't perform as well as true modern steels right now. You know, Damascus steel has got some legends over it. Legends from back in the beginning where they would do stuff like it could cut through the barrel of a rifle, or if you dropped a feather or a hair on the edge of the blade, it would cut itself in half. Now, Damascus steel was the best steel in the world at the time 2,000 years ago. So when 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, when a warrior from that part of the world came over to Europe where they did not have a lot of this metallurgy that they had, and they saw these warriors being able to cut their own swords in half, of course, these swords and the steel had mythical and legendary properties. But they've been able to take ancient steels, compared against the steels now, and the steels now with the information we have is by far way, way better. But that just kind of gives you an idea of the different types of knife steels that you're going to be dealing with. And the reason I kind of bring up the Welded and Damascus steel is because there is so much coming out of China and stuff like that. Some really terrible, terrible Damascus looking steel. And it may be even like Damascus steel itself, where it's two different types of steel, and they've been heated and they've been pounded and they've been folded over and they create a pattern. But if you don't have good steel to begin with, you're going to have terrible Damascus steel. So when you've got these knives that come over from China and you're buying the $24 knife that it looks absolutely gorgeous, that knife is not going to be able to sharpen very well. It's not going to have high strength, and it's going to be pretty much 99.9% of the time, it's going to be terrible. So I just don't want anybody to be kind of taken for a ride there. If they're promised they're getting true Damascus steel, they're not. It's pattern welded steel. And San Mai, I mean, San Mai I think is Spyderco. They do a lot of that where they're taking two different types of steel. Normally the center core is a increased steel, and it is got great wear resistant and edge holding ability, and they surround that by a lesser steel, and it just gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you a really, really flexible blade, but you've got that center core that cuts forever and ever and ever. Okay, so now when we're talking about knife steels, most of the time we're going to look for specific characteristics in our knife steel. We're going to look for great edge retention, we're going to look for corrosion resistance, we're going to look for ease of sharpening, toughness, and a lot of times strength. Now, I've not been able to find a chart on strength, but I think mostly what people are talking about is they're talking about the ability for a blade to kind of bend without breaking, that it takes those kind of lateral forces, and that's kind of more for swords than it is for knife blades. Like, you know, we know that if we take a knife blade like this, we stab it into something, and we step on it or twist it, it's gonna snap and break, okay? And that's what they're talking about is strength. So most of the time, we're not gonna do that. But where you've got toughness, now what we're talking about toughness is if we take that same knife and we kind of chop it into something, that edge is going to not chip out, or it's not gonna, you know, crack the blade, and the edge is going to, you know, not roll over or create an indentation. That is more of a, you know, even though we shouldn't be chopping with our blades, I mean, we do. You hit into things. That's where toughness is going to kind of come into play. But, okay, now the most important thing that when people talk about knife steel is edge retention. I don't know how many times I see that. Everybody seems to, you know, care about edge retention because we don't, you know, sharpen your knives. There are knives people out there who like sharpening knives, who, you know, it's fun for them to do. I, once in a while, I get the urge to sharpen, but if I can take my knife and not sharpen it for 6 months, hell, I'm super damn happy because I get to cut with that knife forever and ever and ever and ever without sharpening. All right, so now this here is a little bit older chart. Now your knife steels that you're going to have is a lot of them are going to be broken down into kind of your super steels, and then you've got your high-end steels, you've got your middle-of-the-road steels, and then you've got your budget steels. Now most of our kind of middle-of-the-road steels here are now, 15 years ago, those were the high-end go-to steels, okay? It's not until recently that a lot of people decided to, in the knife making industry, come out with some, you know, some crazy steels. Now, most of that is my kind of knife company that I love is Spyderco, where they talked about introducing, you know, the S110V, the M4, stuff like that, Mai Steel, because you got to have something, I think, a little bit for us knife nerds to kind of to covet, and they do a damn good job of that. But for most people out there, your middle-of-the-road steels are going to be more than enough. You know, I can't tell you. I have got knives that are high-carbon steel knives. As a Boss, a 420 HC, which is in my, I have a Buck 110 like that. And I can't tell you the last time I sharpened that knife. Unless you are cutting every single day in your job, you know, if there's a guy who's a carpet installer and he wants to use his pocket knife to help him cut that carpet, or you're a carpenter, that's the type of guy who would want to get an S110V knife or an M4 knife, that he would really need it. But you and I, as a regular knife collector, see right now, today I'm carrying this Smock CPM S30V knife. I am going to probably sharpen this knife next year, or need to sharpen it. I might even sharpen it before then, just because I'll get bored one day. But I break down cardboard boxes, I cut some rope once in a while, and I'm not going to be doing so much with this knife that I'm going to cut with it until it is absolutely dull. So, and I have got knives that have got the S110V, the M4 knife in it. I've even got CTS XHP knives. Do I need them in my life? No. But I'm a knife collector and I want them. And I think that's a big difference. Do you need them? I don't think you're going to need to have a knife that will cut Twisted Sizzle rope 700 times. We don't need them. We just want them. And, you know, that's being a little bit of a steel snob. So I'm just kind of, you know, if you're a knife collector, that just kind of gives you an idea of edge retention. And do you need it? Absolutely not. Do you want it? For sure. Should you have it? If you can afford it, absolutely no problem. But if you've got a knife that has got VG10 in it or 1095 and it's done you well for so far, you don't need to go out and spend the extra $200 or $300 or $400 to get yourself an S110V or an LMAX blade. But if you want to have it and you save your money, you can afford it, by all means go out and have some fun and get that. Because you know what? Everybody's tastes are not the same. If it was, we'd all be driving Ladas. All right? So edge retention here. S110V is your max. Now H1 here is a steel that has got great rust resistance, but not a lot of edge retention. So most of the times with steel, you're going to be trading off things, okay? So let's go with our next category. Next categories are going to be corrosion resistance and ease of sharpening. So here we've got the H1, which is absolutely perfect in corrosion resistance, but not so great in edge retention. So now you've got a knife that's an alloy LC200N, which is almost as good as H1, but it's got great edge holding retention, okay? So it depends what the mixture is in a knife. So now corrosion resistant, like I said, is not going to be, it's not rust resistant to the end of time, but there is no such thing as a truly stainless steel. They're all going to be some sort of stained or oxidized. It just takes an extremely long time. Now I know H1 knives and LC200 knives have been stuck in the Great Salt Lake for weeks at a time, and they've come out and there are no spots on them whatsoever. But we'll throw that in the Great Salt Lake in Utah for 2 years. Maybe that's a different story. So corrosion resistance normally is part. And now ease of sharpening. So now ease of sharpening lots of times depends upon is almost like the opposite of edge retention. Now, is it like that every single time? No, absolutely not. But ease of sharpening basically means lots of times when you've got your because what you're doing when you're sharpening a knife is you're wearing away part of that knife until you've reached a really sharp apex. Okay, so if that knife has really high edge retention, then you're going to be basically taking your stone and you're going to be rubbing against your stone for a whole lot longer than you would if something that has got low edge retention. Okay, because you want to hit that apex and you want to hit your burr. So that's normally what we talk about as far as ease of sharpening. The other thing when you're talking about sharpening is sometimes there are other things that are a characteristic of the steel, like a steel that has got really good toughness. When it hits the very edge, you've got what's called a burr, and a burr is just a very thin piece of the metal, and it flops over back and forth like this. As you're sharpening this side, it'll flip over that side. If you're sharpening that side, it'll flip over. So a steel that's got high toughness, now eventually that burr kind of breaks off and it creates, then you've got your kind of your sharpened steel. But sometimes steel will fool you where you think that that burr is gone, but it's not. And the first time you use that knife, the edge slops over and you're wondering, why is my knife dull? So getting rid of a burr is sometimes part of ease of sharpening. Other times, part of ease of sharpening is you've got steels out there that will clog up your sharpening stones, and then all of a sudden it's not as effective, and then the ease of sharpening is harder there. So that just gives you an idea of kind of ease of sharpening. But normally, ease of sharpening is the opposite of edge retention, okay? All right. And then, of course, we've got toughness. Now, toughness is the ability to take shock or impact normally, okay? And your edge's ability to not chip out or, kind of crack your blade. Okay, so now most of the time, in a lot of these really big competition choppers, you'll see there's knife blade sports out there. And normally they're great big knives, about 12 inches long, thick square knives that will do a multitude of things. So now what they're doing is they're doing chopping right down to fine cutting. And so those are the type of knives that you're going to want to have really, really good toughness, okay? So now, really, really good toughness. M4 is a really tough knife. 1095, CPM 3V, 4V, 01, A2, H1, D2. A lot of times your tool steels are going to be the really, really tough steels of your blades, okay? So, and then of course you've got your a little bit more brittle knives, which you've got your CPM S110V, your S90, your 154, your VG10. So normally most knives characteristics are a trade-off, okay? So if you've got high edge retention, hard sharpening, low edge retention, either sharpening is higher. You know, stainlessness and toughness, you know, you just basically got everything is kind of a trade-off depending upon what you've added to that steel, okay? Now, do you need to know how good your blade is at everything? Well, it all depends what you're going to do with your blade. Most of the times, what we're doing with their knives, as a knife collector, what I'm doing with my knives is I'm taking them up in the morning, I'm putting them in my pocket, I'm flicking them throughout the day, I'm cutting threads, I'm cutting a little bit of cardboard. So do I need to have the toughest knife in the entire world? No, I don't, but at least I know about it. And if I ever come across a situation where I want to get a nice big camp knife that I'm going to be using at, say, clearing some brush, you know, in my campsite, I'm going to want a knife that's got some good toughness built into it. So that's why, you know, I thought I would let you guys know kind of what these knife steels are so you can make an informed decision. All right? Now, whew, that's kind of a long one. So, appreciate you guys stopping by. Thanks so much. If you like what you saw, please give me a thumbs up as well as give me a subscription. If you don't agree or you have something to add, please leave it in the comment section. I love to hear from you guys. You know, it makes my day. And if you have any questions, you can always get a hold of me at bigcanucker at gmail.com. I'm answering any of your questions that we got on our Friday wrap-up wrap. So, all right. Thanks so much for stopping by. Please stay safe out there. Keep your stick on the ice, the shiny side up. This is the Big Canucker saying adios.